Why do our kids appear immature? One of the things you may notice when you're dealing with this as your kids get older, they may not seem to act as mature as they should for their age. And this, at first glance, it can seem unusual, but when you take a step back and you look at the situation you're in and everything that's going on, it unfortunately starts to make a lot of sense. I was talking with someone earlier today about this maturity issue earlier today. And the thing that came up is there were, it's like, okay, well, can one of your kids do X? And it was like, well, no, they're not. It's like, well, aren't they mature enough for that? And the answer is no. And then when you look at the way covert narcissistic abuse works and how the other parent interacts with the kids, it slows things down, right? Because they need the child to stay younger or more mature, or basically more dependent upon them longer. So they're not encouraging that independence, that growth, and stuff like that. One of the examples I can use, and I may have mentioned this a few weeks ago, talking about my oldest, it was she's trying to coordinate, my ex is trying to coordinate some time with the kids, and her comment was, well, it's my time, but I need to do this with the girls, so our son needs to stay with me. And I'm thinking to myself, he's 18 years old, he's almost out of high school, and he still can't stay home alone. And and I made a comment about that in an email response back to her, which probably was I don't know. That was one of those things where I read it and went back and forth, and I wasn't really sure to put it in there. But rest assured, because it was in there, she had a conversation to try to dispel that with my son. So when it came up later, he was all defensive. Well, it's my decision and stuff like that. And all my kids have fallen into this situation to where they're not as mature as you would expect. They're many years delayed, and it's unfortunate because it's just yet another example of how narcissistic abuse impacts the raising of children under these circumstances. So part of the problem is trying to correct that in the best way possible, and that's just when you have them, you give them some sovereignty, you allow them to make some decisions, and you encourage them to grow, and you encourage them to be independent. It's really tough whenever you don't have as much time, or even when it's equal time, because the other parent still has a significant amount of influence to counter what you're doing. Now, I haven't talked about this in a while, but that's where that Groundhog Day effect keeps coming in, is every time they come with you, you're basically starting to deprogram what they've already gone through and what they've been through. And guys, it's incredibly frustrating. And if you're going through this right now, I can imagine you are shaking your head, just frustrated that you have to go through this. I think part of the problem with this is there's a lot of stuff that we just have to accept. That if we try to fight it, not that we try to fight it, but if we get angry about it, it keeps us stuck without just accepting what we have to deal with and then trying to come up with solutions to counteract. Like I've talked about in a lot of my other videos and in earlier videos, a significant amount of our time is mitigating and trying to undo the impacts that a narcissist does in these situations. And it's incredibly tough, and the improvement, just like I talk about the improvements that you make and how they can be micro improvements, it's similar with our kids. So, where you would expect things to really progress quick, it's, you're going to make some progression, then they're going to go back to the other place. Progression will get deleted. You'll have to come back. You'll have to start back up. And it's just this ongoing, basically this recursive do loop where every time you circle through it, you are making little improvements, but they can feel pretty minor, and you can actually lose sight of the fact that you actually are making improvements. Again, your best approach on this is just when you have time with your kids, you just work with them on it and you try to make progress. If you dwell on the damage that's happening, you're going to get yourself stuck in this anger mode and this frustration, which you have every right to be in that mode, but it really stifles your improvement and the improvement of your kids. Because every time you get caught in that and you get frustrated and your children actually see that, things either stagnate or they degrade. One of the things that you'll continue to notice when going through this is it just takes a lot of perseverance to get through. I've said a lot in comments and in other videos that this is probably one of the hardest things that you'll ever go through. And I mean, that's a little bit awkward because, there's a bunch of traumatic things you can go through. The problem with this is that it doesn't really feel like there's a finite beginning and end. It's just this ongoing, torture that you're having to endure. And, granted, I mean, real torture obviously would be worse. I mean, some other event could be a lot worse, but most things, it's like if it's something bad happens, it happens, and then you're able to deal with it. So it's tough in these situations because it's just this ongoing, continual, every day you're starting over, you're doing it again, you're trying to do the best when you have somebody who's not helping. I mean, it would be like you're trying to move a rug and your ex is sitting on the middle of it and you're like, could you please get off? No. And you're like, come on, I need to move it into the other room. No. And then so you're sitting there and you're trying to pull, you can't, just follow that as an analogy. You can't touch them. They're in the middle of it. Their dead weight is on it. And, you're just stuck trying to move it. And it's going to be this slow, arduous process. Now, after time, you are going to get it to move. And probably what'll happen is once you move it, they'll just get up and walk away like it was no big deal. And that's kind of this frustration that we're in, is that it's just this ongoing, stupid battle that's negatively impacting our kids, and we're stuck trying to trying to navigate around this minefield that's our ex. And you're not going to get any support from them. You know that they're not going to step up to the plate to try to do something. And you can't even talk to them. You're not going to be able to sit down with your ex and say, look, your behavior is negatively impacting our children. You have to do something about it. It's not, I've almost had those conversations and it doesn't accomplish anything. Exposing them to them, trying to expose them is not going to accomplish anything. Without the empathy and the remorse and the conscience for them to really understand and comprehend what they're doing, there's not going to be any motivation for them to change or to deviate from what they're doing. So you're stuck in this situation where you have this albatross that's just, basically hanging over your neck that you have to work around for the good of your kids. It's tough. It manifests itself in a bunch of different ways. When I was having this conversation earlier about my middle daughter, the question was, well, isn't she mature enough to do X? And I'm like, you're joking, right? And it's frustrating, but it's a lot of times, like I said earlier on this, a lot of times one of the things we have to do is we have to accept what we're dealing with, work through it, and just, try not to get angry about it and just focus on what we can focus on. And I'm telling you, a couple of years ago, this conversation would have irritated me, right? Because it would have thrown all this stuff right in my face, and I would have allowed that frustration and anger to basically envelop me. And I've done it before, right? I've gone through that. I've got angry and it hasn't accomplished anything. So it's like, okay, after going through that, after experiencing that and realizing I'm powerless to affect change with the other parent, what can you do then, right? And that kind of rolls into where I developed the black hole thinking, the absolute thinking. Because, then I can say, okay, well, whatever's going on there, whatever, I have to work on this. And I work on my situation and work within my constraints when I have the kids. And the visitation I've talked about before, in my situation where it's, 2 to 5, right? So it's like 2 days, and then 5 days. So it makes it really tough because in those 2 days, you really don't get to accomplish anything. And in my situation with this last week, there were so many things that happened. Friday was the ex's graduation, so the kids were there. Saturday we did a whole day trip, so that day was kind of lost. And then Sunday was Mother's Day, so there was a significant portion in the middle, or towards the middle half of the day, where I didn't have access to the kids. So that entire 5-day period that I typically would have had with the kids was completely a wash. I wasn't able to do anything. Now I'm rolling into my 2 days, so I have my 2 days, and then it's going to go to they'll be with their mom for the weekend. So it's one of those things where it's tough. And I know that from this last weekend to this time that losing those days is, I'm hoping that it will stabilize and I don't lose any ground, but there's a possibility that, when I roll back into my next 5-day cycle, that I'll have to work a little bit harder to try to get us back to where we were. So maybe by the end of that 5 days, we'll be back to where we were, and then, and then start this iterative process once again. So if you find yourself in this situation and you're noticing the impact on your kids, which more than likely you will, just focus on what you can do to try to help your kids to mature and grow. And hopefully, if you don't get stuck in the anger phase like I did, you don't continue to lose that extra time and slow down the progress. Hopefully, if you can stay focused on this, not allow that frustration to envelop you like I was talking about before, you can make that cycle a little bit better, where you make a little bit more progress than maybe I did through my experience, and speed up your recovery and that of your kids. Okay, so if you're dealing with this and you want to talk about it, add it in the comments below. Like I've said before, we've had a lot of great discussions. People are starting to share their stories and their perspective and their methodology of dealing with this, which I think has been outstanding. Add it in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, please subscribe, and I will chat with you on the next video. Take care. Bye.